The water churned like a living beast that April morning in 1874, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains, and Wilhelmina Grace never saw the submerged log that caught her mare's front leg as they forded the North Platte River, just east of Fort Laramie, Wyoming. One moment she was crossing the rushing current with her father's supply wagon rattling behind her on the bank. The next she was tumbling sideways into water, so cold it stole her breath before she could scream. Her heavy split riding skirt tangled around her legs, dragging her down as the current seized her like greedy hands, and she glimpsed her father's horrified face on the shore before the river pulled her under. Samuel Logan had been watering his buckskin stallion 50 yards downstream when he heard the splash and the mare's panicked whinny. His head snapped up, pale blue eyes scanning the churning brown water, and he spotted the flash of blue fabric disappearing beneath the surface. He did not think, did not hesitate, just kicked off his boots and dove in before his mind could catalog all the ways the North Platte killed people every spring. The cold punched through his shirt and vest like 1,000 needles, but he kept his eyes open beneath the murky water, searching for that splash of blue. Wilhelmina's lungs burned as she tumbled through the current, disoriented and terrified. She had grown up around water, knew how to swim, but the weight of her sodden clothes and the relentless force of the river made every movement feel like pushing through mud. Her fingers scraped against rocks on the river bottom, and she tried to push herself up, but the current rolled her again. Panic clawed at her throat. She was 22 years old, had survived the journey from Pennsylvania to Wyoming territory, had nursed her mother through fever and buried her on the prairie, and now she would drown within sight of Fort Laramie. Then something grabbed her arm with crushing strength. She fought instinctively, terrified it was debris that would drag her deeper, but the grip shifted to wrap around her chest beneath her arms. The world tilted as whatever held her began pulling upward against the current's will. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, choking on water and air in equal measure. Through streaming eyes she glimpsed a man's face, hard-lined and determined, his dark blonde hair plastered to his skull. Samuel kept one arm locked around the woman's ribs and used the other to fight toward the far bank. The current wanted to sweep them downstream toward the rapids, but he was a strong swimmer and stubborn as weathered oak. He had lost his younger sister to a creek back in Missouri when he was 15, had been too far away to help, and some part of him that never stopped grieving refused to let this river win. His boots scraped bottom and he got his feet under him, staggering forward with the woman clutched against his chest. They collapsed together on the muddy bank, both coughing and shaking. Samuel rolled onto his side, one hand still gripping the woman's arm as if the river might reach up and snatch her back. Her father was shouting from across the water, but Samuel could not make out the words over the roaring in his ears and the ragged sound of their breathing. Wilhelmina turned her head to look at the man who had pulled her from the water. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. His eyes met hers and something passed between them in that moment, some wordless understanding of what had almost happened. She had nearly died, and this stranger had refused to let it happen. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse and shaking. "You saved my life." Samuel sat up slowly, water streaming from his clothes. "Are you hurt? Can you move everything?" She tested her limbs carefully. Her right shoulder ached where something had struck it underwater, and she would have bruises everywhere, but nothing felt broken. "I think I am all right, just cold." "We need to get you warm." Samuel looked around, assessing their situation. They were on the opposite bank from her father and the wagon, and the river was far too dangerous to cross again. Fort Laramie is about 2 miles that direction. Can you ride if I can catch your horse?" Wilhelmina looked downstream and spotted her mare standing in the shallows, reins trailing. The horse looked shaken but uninjured. "Yes, but what about my father? He will be frantic." "I will get you to the fort first, then come back and help him find a safer crossing point." Samuel stood and offered his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. His grip was warm despite the cold water, calloused and strong. They walked downstream together, moving carefully on the slick bank. Samuel spoke in a low, calm voice to the mare as they approached, and the horse allowed him to catch her reins. He checked her legs carefully, running his hands down each one, then nodded with satisfaction. She seemed sound, just spooked. He helped Wilhelmina into the saddle, and she tried not to wince at the pain in her shoulder. Samuel swung up behind her without asking, settling into place with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. She was acutely aware of his arms around her as he took the reins, his chest pressed against her back, both of them shivering in their soaked clothes. They rode in silence for a few minutes before Wilhelmina spoke. "I am Wilhelmina Grace. My father and I have been traveling for 3 months to reach Fort Laramie. He has taken a position as the new surveyor for the territory. Samuel Logan. I run cattle about 30 miles south of here." He paused. "You should not have tried to cross there. The current is too strong this time of year. We did not know." Wilhelmina heard the defensiveness in her voice and softened her tone. "We have been following the wagon trail and it led to that crossing point. That crossing is safe in summer and fall. Spring is different. The snowmelt turns the North Platte into a killer." He shifted slightly behind her. "You were lucky. I have seen whole families swept away trying to ford during runoff season." Wilhelmina shuddered, and not just from the cold. "Then I am doubly grateful you were there. What brought you to that spot?" "I was heading to the fort for supplies. My foreman broke his arm last week, and I needed to send a telegram to my brother in Cheyenne to come help with the spring branding." Samuel fell quiet for a moment. "I almost stayed at the ranch another day, almost sent one of my hands instead." The weight of that statement hung between them. If he had made a different choice, Wilhelmina would be dead. She reached back without thinking and touched his arm where it rested against her waist. "I believe things happen for a reason. You were meant to be there." Samuel did not respond, but his arm tightened fractionally around her middle. They rode on toward Fort Laramie, the morning sun beginning to warm them as it climbed higher in the clear Wyoming sky. The fort came into view across the grassland, its whitewashed buildings and stockade walls standing against the vast emptiness of the territory. Samuel guided the mare through the main gate, nodding to the soldiers on guard duty who eyed their bedraggled appearance with curiosity. He headed directly for the post surgeon's quarters, a squat building near the parade ground. "I am fine," Wilhelmina protested as he dismounted and reached up to help her down. "I do not need a doctor. Humor me." Samuel's hand spanned her waist as he lifted her from the saddle, and he set her down with careful gentleness. "Nearly drowning can have effects that do not show up right away, and that shoulder needs looking at. I saw you favor it." Before she could argue further, he had knocked on the surgeon's door. A middle-aged man in a captain's uniform opened it, took one look at them, and ushered them inside without questions. Within minutes, Wilhelmina found herself wrapped in a blanket in front of a wood stove while the surgeon examined her shoulder and listened to her breathing. "You are fortunate, Miss Grace," Captain Reynolds said after his examination. "No water in the lungs, no signs of hypothermia despite your soaking, and that shoulder is just badly bruised, not dislocated. You will be sore for several days, but you should heal without complications." Samuel, who had been standing near the door dripping on the floor, visibly relaxed. "Thank you, Captain. Now I need to get back across the river and help her father find a safer crossing." "The ferry operates 6 miles upriver," Captain Reynolds said. "The ferryman knows that stretch of river better than anyone. Send Mr. Grace there with his wagon." "I am coming with you," Wilhelmina said, standing up despite the blanket. "My father will be worried sick." "You need to rest and get warm," Samuel said firmly. "I will bring him back here within a few hours." "I am not some fragile flower that needs to be locked away after a mishap," Wilhelmina said, her dark eyes flashing. "That is my father out there, and he just watched me get swept away. I will not sit here drinking tea while he suffers." Samuel studied her for a long moment, and something like approval flickered across his face. "All right, but we are doing this my way. We ride to the ferry, we cross safely, and you stay with the wagon while I go find your father." "Agreed." Captain Reynolds provided them with dry clothes, military issue that hung loose on Wilhelmina but were blessedly warm. Samuel changed quickly into a spare shirt and trousers, and they set out again on the borrowed mare, Samuel's stallion having been left on the far bank. The ride to the ferry took 40 minutes, and Wilhelmina spent most of it studying the broad grassland and distant mountains, trying to reconcile this wild, open country with the green hills of Pennsylvania she had left behind. "What made you come to Wyoming territory?" Samuel asked as they rode, his voice rumbling against her back. "My father wanted adventure before he grew too old," Wilhelmina said. "He spent 20 years surveying townships back east, and when the army offered him a position out here, he jumped at it. My mother died 2 years ago, and I think he needed to escape the memories." "What about you? What did you want?" Wilhelmina considered the question. "I wanted to see the places I had only read about in books. I wanted to discover who I could be away from the expectations of Philadelphia society. Out here, no one knows that I was supposed to marry the banker's son, or that I scandalously refused him because I wanted more from life than hosting dinner parties and embroidering pillowcases." Samuel made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Something tells me you would have made a terrible banker's wife." "The worst," Wilhelmina agreed and found herself smiling. "What about you? How did you end up ranching in Wyoming? My father died when I was 17, left me with debts and a played-out farm in Missouri. I worked odd jobs for 5 years, saved every penny and came west in 1869 with my brother. We filed claims, built a ranch from nothing, and have been growing it ever since." Pride colored his voice. "We run about 500 head now, have good water and better grass. It is a hard life, but it is ours." They reached the ferry landing to find a grizzled old man smoking a pipe beside a sturdy flatboat. He sized them up with knowing eyes and quoted a price that Samuel paid without haggling. The crossing was smooth and uneventful, the ferry moving along a rope strung across the river at a point where the current ran slower. On the far bank, Samuel borrowed a horse from the ferryman and left Wilhelmina with the wagon they had arranged to hire. "Stay here," he ordered. "I mean it this time. That bank is unstable in places, and I do not want to have to fish you out twice in one day." Wilhelmina wanted to argue but recognized the sense in his words. "Please hurry, and be careful." Samuel touched the brim of his hat and rode off at a gallop. Wilhelmina paced beside the wagon, her wet clothes drying stiffly in the warm sun, her mind replaying the terrifying moments in the water over and over. But mixed with the fear was something else, a growing awareness of the man who had saved her. Samuel Logan was unlike any man she had known back east. There was a directness to him, an unadorned honesty that she found refreshing after years of navigating the elaborate social dances of Philadelphia society. An hour passed before she spotted 2 riders and a wagon in the distance. As they drew closer, She recognized her father's gray gelding and his stocky frame hunched in the saddle. She ran to meet them, and her father nearly fell from his horse in his haste to dismount and crush her in a desperate embrace. "Wilhelmina, my girl," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I had lost you. I thought the river had taken you like it took your mother's spirit. I am here, Papa. I am safe." She held him tight, feeling him tremble. "This man, Samuel Logan, he saved me." He dove in without hesitation. Her father released her and turned to Samuel, who had dismounted and stood a respectful distance away. Thomas Grace was a solid man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a surveyor's precise way of moving. He approached Samuel with tears still wet on his weathered cheeks and gripped his hand with both of his own. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," Thomas said hoarsely. "She is all I have left in this world. If you had not been there, if you had hesitated even a moment," his voice broke. "No debt," Samuel said quietly. "Anyone would have done the same. But they did not. You did." Thomas cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders, visibly pulling himself together. "You must allow me to do something, dinner at the fort at least. And I would hear how you found her, how you got her out of that cursed river." Samuel glanced at Wilhelmina, and their eyes met across the dusty space. Something unspoken passed between them again, that same connection she had felt on the riverbank. "Dinner would be welcome," he said. They traveled together to the ferry, crossed in a group, and made their way to Fort Laramie as the afternoon sun slanted long shadows across the prairie. The post commander had been expecting Thomas Grace and had quarters prepared for him in the officers' housing. He listened with growing horror to the story of Wilhelmina's near drowning and immediately dispatched soldiers to post warning signs at the dangerous crossing point. That evening, Wilhelmina bathed in a copper tub brought to her small room, washing away the last traces of river mud and fear. She dressed carefully in one of her better gowns, a deep green wool that complemented her dark hair and fair skin. As she pinned up her hair, still damp and curling rebelliously, she caught herself wondering what Samuel would think when he saw her cleaned up and properly dressed. She found him in the officers' mess, standing awkwardly in a corner while uniformed men talked and laughed around him. He had cleaned up as well, his hair combed back, his jaw freshly shaved, wearing what was clearly his best shirt and a string tie. When he spotted her, his expression shifted in a way that made her breath catch. He crossed the room to her, moving with that same easy confidence he showed on horseback. "You look nice," he said, then seemed to realize how inadequate the words were. "I mean, you look beautiful. Not that you did not look fine before, just, well, less like a drowned rat." Wilhelmina laughed, delighted by his awkwardness. "Thank you. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Logan." "Samuel, please. I think we are past formalities after what we have been through." "Then you must call me Wilhelmina, or Mina. My mother used to call me that." They sat down to dinner with Thomas and several of the fort's officers. The conversation flowed easily, centered largely on the challenges of settling the territory and the conflicts with various tribes. Samuel spoke little but listened intently, and Wilhelmina noticed how his presence seemed to steady the space around him. When he did contribute, his observations were thoughtful and showed a deep understanding of the land and its people. After the meal, Samuel walked Wilhelmina and her father back to their quarters. The night was clear and cold, the stars so bright and numerous that Wilhelmina felt she could reach up and gather them like wildflowers. Thomas excused himself to arrange his surveying equipment, leaving Samuel and Wilhelmina standing outside in the starlight. "Thank you again for today," Wilhelmina said. "I know I already said it, but it bears repeating. You gave me my life back." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his face shadowed in the dim light from the nearest window. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had been 10 minutes later, or if I had decided to water my horse upstream instead of down. But you did not. You were exactly where you needed to be." Wilhelmina moved closer, drawn by something she did not fully understand. "Do you believe in fate, Samuel?" "I believe in hard work and preparation and taking responsibility for your choices," he said slowly. "But today made me wonder. It felt like something beyond coincidence. Perhaps we were meant to meet." The words came out softer than she intended, almost shy. Samuel looked down at her, and in the starlight his pale eyes seemed to hold their own luminescence. "Perhaps we were." He reached up as if to touch her face, then caught himself and let his hand drop. "I should go. You need rest after the day you have had." "When will I see you again?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with more meaning than its simple words suggested. Samuel's expression softened. "I need to stay in town for a few days to wait for my brother's reply to that telegram, and to purchase supplies. I could call on you tomorrow if that would be acceptable." "I would like that very much." He touched his hat brim and walked away into the darkness, and Wilhelmina stood watching until she could no longer distinguish his form from the shadows. When she finally went inside, her father was waiting with a knowing look on his weathered face. "That is a good man," Thomas said without preamble, "steady and capable, the kind of man who builds things that last. Papa, I only just met him today. Sometimes that is all it takes." Thomas smiled, but there was sadness beneath it. "I knew I would marry your mother within an hour of meeting her. She was serving punch at a church social, and when our hands touched as she gave me the cup, I felt like lightning had struck me. We were engaged within a month, married within 3. Wilhelmina had heard the story before but never tired of it. "I miss her." "So do I, my girl, every day." Thomas squeezed her shoulder gently. "But she would want us to keep living, keep finding joy. And she would approve of a man brave enough to dive into a raging river for someone he did not even know." That night, Wilhelmina lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the fort settling into sleep. Sentries called out the watch change, horses nickered in the stables, and somewhere a fiddle played a lonesome tune. She touched her shoulder where Samuel's arm had been wrapped around her, holding her safe, and felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the blankets piled on the bed. Samuel appeared the next morning just after breakfast, leading his buckskin stallion and carrying a bundle wrapped in paper. He found Wilhelmina sitting on the porch of her father's quarters, sketching in a leather-bound book. She looked up as he approached, and her face lit with a smile that hit him somewhere in the center of his chest. "Good morning," she called, setting aside her drawing. "You are prompt. Rancher's habit. Sun rises, we rise with it." He climbed the steps and held out the bundle. "I brought you something, as a welcome to Wyoming territory." Wilhelmina unwrapped the paper carefully and gasped. Inside was a beautifully tooled leather holster containing a small revolver with pearl grips. She looked up at Samuel in surprise. "I have never fired a gun." "Then I will teach you." Out here, knowing how to defend yourself is not optional, especially for a woman. The territory can be dangerous. He sat down beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "That is a Colt Lightning, .38 caliber. Small enough for your hands, light enough to carry, powerful enough to stop a threat. I know the gunsmith at the fort, and he owed me a favor." Wilhelmina lifted the revolver carefully, feeling its weight. "This is too generous. This is practical. Your father will be surveying in remote areas, and you will likely accompany him. You need to be able to protect yourself." Samuel covered her hand with his, adjusting her grip on the weapon. "Never point it at anything you do not intend to shoot. Always assume it is loaded. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to fire." They spent the morning outside the fort walls, Samuel patiently teaching Wilhelmina the basics of shooting. She proved to be a quick study, her artist's eye serving her well in lining up sights. By noon, she was hitting tin cans at 20 paces more often than not, and Samuel found himself impressed by her focus and determination. "You have a natural talent for this," he said as she reloaded the cylinder under his watchful eye. "I have a good teacher." Wilhelmina finished loading and holstered the weapon with growing confidence. "Thank you, Samuel. This is one of the most thoughtful gifts I have ever received." They walked back toward the fort together, leading Samuel's horse between them. The day was warm, with a breeze carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. Samuel found himself talking more than usual, telling Wilhelmina about his ranch, about the challenges of building something from nothing, about his hopes for the future. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed she was truly paying attention. "Why cattle instead of farming?" she asked at one point. "The land is too dry for reliable farming without irrigation, and irrigation is expensive. But cattle can range over huge areas, finding grass and water, and there is a growing market for beef with all the new towns springing up along the railroad." Samuel's eyes took on a distant look. "In 10 years, if I work hard and have some luck, I could have one of the largest herds in the territory, maybe even expand into horses. There is good money in selling mounts to the army." "You think big," Wilhelmina observed. "Out here you have to. Small dreams get swallowed by the prairie." He glanced at her. "What about you? What are your dreams?" Wilhelmina was quiet for a long moment. "I want to paint the West. The landscapes, the people, the life out here. Back in Philadelphia, I studied at the Academy of Fine Arts, but women are not taken seriously as artists. We are supposed to dabble in watercolors as a genteel pastime, not pursue it as a profession." Her voice gained passion as she spoke. "But out here, maybe the rules are different. Maybe I could be different. I would like to see your work sometime. Really, most men find art frivolous." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Wilhelmina, I am going to be honest with you because I do not know how to be anything else. I would like to see your art because I want to know everything about you. I want to know what you think about when you watch the sunrise, what makes you laugh, what scares you. Yesterday, when I pulled you from that river, something changed for me. I cannot explain it better than that." Wilhelmina stared at him, her heart pounding. "Samuel, we have known each other barely a day. I know, it is crazy, but that does not make it less true." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with his own words. "I am not a poet, I am a rancher. I know cattle and grass and hard work. But I know what I feel, and what I feel when I look at you is that I do not want to walk away and wonder what might have been." "Then do not walk away," Wilhelmina heard herself say. "Stay, court me properly. Give us time to see if this feeling has roots, or if it is just the drama of what happened yesterday. I can do that." Samuel's expression shifted to relief and determination mixed together. "I need to return to the ranch soon, but I could come back to Fort Laramie once a week. More, if possible." "Would that be acceptable?" "That would be acceptable." They sealed the agreement with a handshake that lasted longer than necessary, both of them reluctant to break the contact. Thomas appeared on the porch of his quarters and called them for lunch, and they went inside together, something unspoken but powerful now binding them. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. Samuel would arrive at Fort Laramie every Saturday morning and spend the day with Wilhelmina. Sometimes they rode out across the prairie with a military escort, and Wilhelmina would sketch, while Samuel talked about the land and its moods. Sometimes they walked around the fort, and she introduced him to the officers' wives who had befriended her. Sometimes they simply sat and talked for hours, learning each other's histories and quirks and dreams. Thomas watched their courtship with approval, seeing in Samuel the steadiness and integrity he valued. He also noted how his daughter bloomed under Samuel's attention, her laughter coming more easily, her eyes brighter. She had been so serious since her mother's death, so focused on being strong for him, that he had almost forgotten the spirited girl she had been. On the fourth Saturday, Samuel arrived with his brother in tow. Silas Logan was 2 years younger than Samuel, with the same strong build but darker hair and a more outgoing personality. He greeted Wilhelmina with easy charm and immediately began telling embarrassing stories about Samuel's youth that made her laugh until her sides ached. He once tried to impress a girl back in Missouri by riding a half-broken Mustang bareback, Silas said, his eyes dancing with mischief. Made it about 3 seconds before that horse launched him into a water trough. I was 16, Samuel protested, but he was grinning, and I did eventually break that horse. After it broke 3 of your ribs, Silas countered. He turned to Wilhelmina. My brother is the most stubborn man alive. Once he sets his mind to something, he does not quit until he wins or dies trying. I am beginning to see that, Wilhelmina said, meeting Samuel's eyes with a warmth that made his breath catch. The 4 of them, including Thomas, had lunch together at the fort's small restaurant, and the conversation flowed easily. Silas was engaged to a woman in Cheyenne and planned to marry in the fall. He talked about his fiancée with obvious devotion, describing how they had met when she was traveling through with her family 2 years earlier. She is a teacher, Silas said proudly. Smart as a whip and twice as sharp. She is going to start a school near the ranch once we are married. There are enough families in the area now to make it worthwhile. That is wonderful, Wilhelmina said. I would love to meet her. You should come visit the ranch, Samuel said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. Both of you, he added, glancing at Thomas. It is beautiful country, and I would like to show you what I have built. Thomas considered the invitation carefully. I have surveys to complete, but perhaps in a month or so when the spring work eases up. Would that suit? That would suit fine. Samuel tried to keep the eagerness from his voice, but failed. The thought of Wilhelmina seeing his ranch, his home, filled him with an anticipation he had not felt in years. As the weeks passed into May, Samuel and Wilhelmina's courtship deepened. They exchanged letters between his visits, hers full of observations about fort life and descriptions of the paintings she was working on, his more sparse, but carrying a sincerity that touched her. He wrote about the spring calving, about a wolf that had been harassing his herd, about his hopes that she was thinking of him as often as he thought of her. On a warm Saturday in mid-May, Samuel took Wilhelmina riding to a place he called Echo Bluff, a rock formation about 5 miles from the fort. They climbed to the top, where the wind whipped around them and the whole vast sweep of the territory spread out below. Wilhelmina stood at the edge, her hair escaping its pins, her face flushed with exertion and joy. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I could paint for 100 years and never capture the scope of it." Samuel stood beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. "I wanted you to see this, to understand what I see when I look at this country. It is harsh and dangerous and beautiful, and it demands everything from you. But if you are willing to give everything, it gives back in ways you cannot imagine." Wilhelmina turned to face him, and the expression in her eyes made his heart pound. "I am beginning to understand. Wilhelmina, I need to tell you something." Samuel took her hands in his calloused palms rough against her smoother skin. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I pulled you from that river. I know it is fast. I know we are still learning each other, but I cannot keep pretending what I feel is anything less than that. Samuel." Her voice was barely audible over the wind. You do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that this is not a game or a passing fancy for me. When I court a woman, I court her with the intention of marriage, of building a life together." He squeezed her hands gently. "I am asking you to consider that future. Me and you, the ranch, whatever dreams we can build together." Wilhelmina felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me because I have never felt anything like this before. But it also feels right, like pieces clicking into place." Samuel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating fast and hard, matching the rhythm of her own. They stood like that for a long time, the wind swirling around them, the vast empty land witnessing their promises. "I want to do this properly," Samuel said eventually. "I want to ask your father's permission, give you a ring, plan a future together. But first, I want you to see the ranch. To know what you would be saying yes to. It is not an easy life, Mina. The work is hard, the isolation can be crushing, and there are real dangers. I need you to see all of it before you make any decisions. Then take me there. Show me your world, Samuel Logan, and let me decide if I can make it mine too." They rode back to the fort as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. That evening, Samuel formally asked Thomas for permission to continue courting his daughter with the intention of marriage. Thomas gave his blessing readily, seeing in the young rancher the kind of man he had hoped Wilhelmina would find. "She is strong-willed and independent," Thomas warned. "She will not be content to just keep house and bear children. She will need purpose and challenge." "I know," Samuel said, "and I would not want her any other way. The West needs strong women, not ornamental ones." 2 weeks later, Wilhelmina and Thomas made the journey to the Logan Ranch. The trip took most of a day, crossing grassland that rolled like ocean swells, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and stands of cottonwood marking underground streams. As they crested a final rise, Samuel reined in his horse and gestured ahead with obvious pride. "There it is. Logan Cattle Company." Wilhelmina caught her breath. The ranch spread across a broad valley, protected on 3 sides by low hills. The ranch house was built of logs and stone, long and low, with a covered porch running the full length. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding grassland, hundreds of them, their rust-colored hides bright against the green. A creek ran through the property, lined with willows and cottonwoods that provided pockets of shade. "Samuel, it is beautiful," she said honestly. "It is home." He urged his horse forward. "Come on, I want you to meet the hands and see everything." The next 2 days were a whirlwind of new experiences. Samuel introduced Wilhelmina to his ranch hands, a collection of weathered men ranging from 18 to 60, all of whom treated their boss with obvious respect. She met the cook, a former Army sergeant named Murphy, who ran the kitchen with military precision and made the best biscuits she had ever tasted. She learned about the daily rhythms of ranch life, the constant work of maintaining fences, checking cattle, managing water sources, and preparing for the brutal Wyoming winter. Samuel's brother Silas was there with his fiancée, Catherine, a petite blonde woman with sharp intelligence and a warm laugh. The 2 women bonded immediately over their shared experience of being educated women in a frontier environment. Catherine spoke enthusiastically about her plans for the school and her excitement about married life, and Wilhelmina found herself envying the other woman's certainty. On the second evening, Samuel took Wilhelmina on a walk to the creek. The sun was setting, turning the water to molten gold, and frogs sang in the reeds. They sat on a fallen log, close enough that their thighs touched, and watched the light fade. "What do you think?" Samuel asked, his voice carrying a nervousness she had rarely heard from him. "I think it is everything you said it was, hard and beautiful and demanding." Wilhelmina plucked a piece of grass and twisted it between her fingers. "I also think I could be happy here, with you." Samuel turned to face her fully. "Are you sure?" "There are no art galleries here, no museums, no society events. The nearest town is Fort Laramie, and even that is hardly a metropolis. You would be isolated for months at a time during winter. The work never stops, and ranch wives work just as hard as their husbands." "I am sure." Wilhelmina met his eyes steadily. "Samuel, I did not come west to recreate Philadelphia on the prairie. I came to discover who I could be without all the restrictions and expectations I left behind. And what I have discovered is that I want to be your wife. I want to build this life with you." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to wait, plan something more romantic, but I cannot hold back anymore." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple gold band with a single sapphire set in the center. It was my mother's. The only thing of value she owned. She gave it to me before she died and made me promise to give it to the woman I truly loved. Wilhelmina's vision blurred with tears. "It is perfect. Wilhelmina Grace, will you marry me? Will you take on this crazy life and all its challenges? Will you build something lasting with me, right here in this wild country?" "Yes." The word came out as half laugh, half sob. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her for the first time, gentle and reverent, and Wilhelmina felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. This was her future, this man and this land and the life they would create together. They returned to the ranch house hand in hand to find Thomas, Silas, and Catherine waiting with champagne and wide smiles. Apparently, Samuel had confided his intentions to his brother, who had been keeping Thomas distracted. They celebrated late into the evening, making plans and dreaming about the future. The wedding was set for late June, giving them just over a month to prepare. Wilhelmina and Thomas returned to Fort Laramie, where news of the engagement spread quickly through the small community. The officers' wives immediately took charge of planning, delighted to have a wedding to organize. Wilhelmina found herself swept up in discussions of flowers and food and music. But through it all, she remained grounded by the weight of her mother's ring on her finger and the memory of Samuel's kiss by the creek. Samuel visited every weekend without fail, usually staying at the fort's modest hotel. They took long walks together, planned their future home, and learned to navigate the small disagreements that arose. Wilhelmina wanted to set aside a room in the house as a studio where she could paint, and Samuel immediately began planning modifications to create the best light. Samuel worried about her safety during the long hours he would be away from the house working, and Wilhelmina assured him she was becoming quite proficient with her Colt Lightning and intended to keep practicing. "I will not be a burden or a worry," she told him firmly one afternoon as they sat on the fort's porch. "I will be your partner, Samuel. That means carrying my weight. I know." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I just cannot shake the image of you disappearing under that water. It still wakes me up some nights. Then remember that you saved me. Remember that you refused to let the river win." She laced her fingers through his. "We survived that for a reason. We are meant to have this life together." The wedding took place on a brilliant June morning at the fort's chapel, a small building that could barely hold the assembled guests. Wilhelmina wore a dress of ivory silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her slimmer frame. She carried wildflowers that Samuel had ridden out before dawn to collect. Thomas walked her down the short aisle with tears in his eyes, and when he placed her hand in Samuel's, he whispered, "Be happy, my girl. Your mother and I both want that for you." Samuel stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, looking both nervous and determined. When Wilhelmina reached him, he took her hand and held it like a lifeline. The chaplain led them through their vows, traditional words that took on new meaning in the rough frontier setting. "I, Samuel, take you, Wilhelmina, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. I, Wilhelmina, take you, Samuel, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a tenderness that made the gathered crowd sigh. They walked back down the aisle together as man and wife, stepping out into the bright morning and the beginning of their shared life. The reception was held in the officers' mess, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Samuel proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Wilhelmina through reels and waltzes with confident grace. When she commented on it, he grinned and admitted his mother had insisted all her sons learn proper social graces, ranchers or not. As the sun set, Samuel and Wilhelmina climbed into a wagon loaded with wedding gifts and set off for the ranch. They had decided to spend their wedding night at a small cabin on the ranch property, a line shack that Samuel had spent the past week fixing up and making comfortable. The ride took several hours, but Wilhelmina did not mind. She sat close to Samuel on the wagon seat, his arm around her, pointing out constellations and talking about everything and nothing. The cabin was simple but clean, with a bed covered in new quilts, a wood stove, and wildflowers in a jar on the small table. Samuel carried Wilhelmina over the threshold, and she laughed at the traditional gesture given their rustic surroundings. They spent their wedding night discovering each other, learning the landscape of bodies and hearts, building the intimate foundation of their marriage. The next morning, they rode to the main ranch house to begin their life in earnest. Silas and Catherine had moved into a smaller house on the property after their own wedding 2 weeks earlier, giving Samuel and Wilhelmina privacy. The ranch hands had clearly made an effort to spruce up the main house, with everything swept clean and more wildflowers on the table. Wilhelmina spent the first weeks of her marriage learning the endless work of running a ranch household. She woke before dawn to help Murphy prepare breakfast for the hands, then spent her days managing the vegetable garden, preserving food, mending clothes, and handling the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch functioning. In the evenings, after Samuel came in dusty and exhausted from the day's work, they would sit on the porch together and talk about their day, making plans, dreaming about the future. Samuel was patient with her learning curve, never criticizing when she burned bread or forgot to check the chicken coop and lost eggs to a snake. He taught her to ride better, to rope, to read the weather signs that warned of storms. In turn, she brought a softness to his life that he had not realized he was missing. She painted watercolors of the ranch and surrounding landscape, filling the house with color. She played the piano that had been his mother's, filling the evening air with music. She made the ranch house into a home. In August, Thomas came to visit for a week. He had been surveying in the northern part of the territory and wanted to check on his daughter. He found her tanned and confident, moving through ranch tasks with growing competence, her eyes bright with happiness. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he told her how proud he was. "You have found your place," he said simply. Your mother would be so pleased to see you like this." "I miss her," Wilhelmina admitted. "Sometimes I wish she could have met Samuel, could have seen this life I am building. She knows." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she is smiling." The first test of their marriage came in September when Samuel had to spend 3 weeks away from the ranch, driving a herd to market in Cheyenne. Wilhelmina stayed behind to manage the ranch with Silas and the hands, and though she tried to hide it, she was nervous about being in charge. Samuel noticed and pulled her aside the night before he left. "You can do this," he said firmly. "You are smart and capable, and everyone here respects you. Trust your instincts, and if you are not sure about something, ask Silas or Murphy. They will help you. What if something goes wrong? Then you will handle it, because that is who you are, Mina. You handle things." He kissed her forehead. "I have to go on this drive. The money from selling the herd will carry us through winter and let us expand next year, but I would not leave if I did not trust you to hold things together here." Samuel left before dawn with 6 hands and 200 head of cattle. Wilhelmina stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared over the eastern hills, then squared her shoulders and went to start her day. The first week passed smoothly enough. She managed the household, helped Catherine with plans for the school, and learned more about the daily operations of the ranch from Silas. The second week brought challenges. A windstorm tore part of the roof off the barn, and Wilhelmina organized repairs, climbing up herself to help nail shingles despite Silas's protests. One of the hands cut his leg badly while mending fence, and Wilhelmina cleaned and stitched the wound with steady hands, drawing on half-remembered lessons from helping her mother nurse sick neighbors back in Pennsylvania. The third week brought the real crisis. One evening, just after sunset, a young hand named Billy came racing back to the ranch shouting about cattle rustlers. He had been checking the southern pasture and spotted several men cutting out cattle and driving them toward the hills. Wilhelmina's heart pounded, but she forced herself to think clearly. "How many men?" she asked Billy. "4 that I saw, maybe more. How many cattle?" 20 head, maybe 30. Wilhelmina made quick calculations. Samuel would lose a significant amount of money if that many cattle were stolen, but she also knew rustlers were dangerous and violent. She turned to Silas. "What do you think?" "I think we need to get those cattle back, but we need to be smart about it." Silas's jaw was set in a hard line. "Murphy, you and Billy stay here and guard the house and the women. The rest of us will ride out and see if we can track them." "I am coming too," Wilhelmina said. "Mina, no, it is too dangerous. This is my ranch too, and those are our cattle. I can shoot, I can ride, and I will not sit here doing nothing while you risk your lives." She met his eyes steadily. "Besides, you need every gun you can get. There are only 5 hands here besides you. Against 4 rustlers or more, those are not great odds." Silas wanted to argue but recognized the truth in her words. "Stay behind us, keep your eyes open, and for God's sake, do not do anything reckless." They rode out under the rising moon, following the trail the rustlers had left. The cattle had churned up the ground, making the tracks easy to follow even in the dim light. After an hour, they spotted a distant fire in the hills and approached carefully. The rustlers had made camp in a small canyon, the stolen cattle bunched together and guarded by one man while the others sat around the fire drinking and laughing. Silas made quick decisions, positioning the men in a semicircle around the canyon entrance. When everyone was in place, he called out in a voice that echoed off the rock walls, "You are surrounded. Let the cattle go and ride out, and nobody has to die tonight." The rustlers scrambled for their weapons, and for a tense moment, Wilhelmina thought shooting would start. Then the apparent leader, a scarred man with a missing ear, laughed harshly. "You are bluffing. There are not enough ranchers in this area to surround us. Then test us and find out, Silas called back. But I promise you we have enough guns to make this very unpleasant for you. The rustlers conferred in low voices. One of them started to raise his rifle, and Wilhelmina acted on instinct. She fired her Colt lightning into the air, the crack of the shot echoing sharply. Immediately, the other ranch hands fired as well, creating the impression of many more guns than they actually had. The rustlers broke. They mounted their horses in a panic and rode hard out of the canyon, abandoning the stolen cattle and their camp. Silas let them go, and once the sound of hoofbeats faded, he began laughing with relief. That was good thinking, Mina. That first shot made them think we had a whole posse out here. They gathered the stolen cattle and drove them back to the ranch, arriving just before dawn. Wilhelmina was exhausted and sore, but she also felt a fierce pride. She had protected what was hers, had stood up to danger and not flinched. Samuel returned 3 days later with the hands and money from the cattle sale. Wilhelmina met him in the yard as he dismounted, and he swept her into his arms with a joy that made her breathless. "I missed you," he said against her hair. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. "I missed you too." She pulled back to look at him. "We had some excitement while you were gone." As they walked to the house, she told him about the rustlers. Samuel's expression cycled through shock, pride, and concern. When she finished, he pulled her close again. "You could have been killed, but I was not. We got the cattle back and nobody was hurt." She looked up at him. "I know you want to protect me, Samuel, but I am a ranch wife now. That means facing danger when it comes. I know." He cupped her face in his hands. "You are incredible, do you know that? Brave and smart and everything I could have hoped for." They went inside together, and Samuel insisted on hearing every detail from Silas and the hands. That evening, he gathered everyone on the porch and formally thanked them for protecting the ranch and his wife. Then he announced that from the profits of the cattle sale, everyone would receive a bonus, and Wilhelmina would have final say on all ranch decisions when he was away. Fall came to Wyoming territory in a rush of color and cold. Wilhelmina spent September and October helping prepare the ranch for winter, preserving food, checking that all the buildings were sound, ensuring there was enough hay stored for the livestock. She also discovered she was pregnant, a realization that filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told Samuel one evening in late October as they sat by the fire. He had been going over account books, and she had been pretending to read, too nervous to concentrate. Finally, she set down her book and just said it. "Samuel, I am going to have a baby." He looked up slowly as if not sure he had heard correctly. "A baby?" "Yes, I think sometime in April, based on my calculations." Samuel set aside his books and crossed to her in 2 long strides. He knelt in front of her chair and took her hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Wilhelmina felt tears threatening. "I know it is fast. We have only been married a few months, and I am not sure I know how to be a mother yet, but I am happy." Samuel kissed her hands, her wrists, her tear-stained cheeks. "I am so happy I can barely breathe. You have given me everything, Mina. A home, a future, now a child. You are everything I never knew I needed." They held each other by the fire, making plans and dreaming about the baby. Samuel immediately became overprotective, trying to prevent Wilhelmina from doing any heavy work. She tolerated it for about 3 days before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she told him firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while also managing their lives. I will not spend the next 6 months sitting on the porch like a delicate ornament. I just want you to be safe. Then trust me to know my limits." She softened her tone and took his hand. "I promise I will be careful, but I need to stay active, stay useful. It will drive me crazy otherwise." They compromised, with Wilhelmina continuing her usual work, but accepting help with the heaviest tasks. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow that piled in deep drifts and temperatures that made stepping outside feel like punishment, she found herself grateful for the forced rest. She spent the short winter days painting, raiding, and helping Catherine plan the school that would open in the spring. In the evenings, she and Samuel would sit by the fire, and he would read aloud while she knitted tiny clothes for the baby. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the four of them plus Murphy and a few hands who had nowhere else to go. They ate a feast of roasted venison and all the trimmings, sang carols around the piano, and exchanged simple gifts. Samuel gave Wilhelmina a music box that played a tune his mother had loved. She gave him a painted portrait of the ranch, the house and barn and surrounding hills captured in loving detail. "So I can always see it the way you see it," she explained, "through the eyes of someone who loves it." Winter deepened through January and February, and the ranch became an island of warmth in a frozen world. Wilhelmina's pregnancy progressed normally, though she felt enormous and clumsy as her body changed. Samuel thought she had never looked more beautiful, and told her so often enough that she almost believed him. In late March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Thomas arrived with news. He had been offered a promotion to chief surveyor for the entire Wyoming Territory, a prestigious position based in Cheyenne. He would be leaving Fort Laramie in a month. "Come visit us often," Wilhelmina urged, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "This baby needs to know his grandfather." "His?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "So certain it will be a boy, or her grandfather," Wilhelmina corrected with a smile. "Either way, we want you in our child's life." "Nothing could keep me away," Thomas promised. "You and Samuel have built something special here, Mina. I am proud of you both." The baby came on a warm April evening, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Wilhelmina had been working in the garden when she felt the first contraction, a gripping pain that made her gasp. She made it to the house before her water broke, and then everything became a blur of pain and effort. Catherine and Murphy took charge, having more experience with childbirth than Samuel, who hovered anxiously until Wilhelmina finally ordered him out of the room. Silas kept him company on the porch, pouring whiskey and telling rambling stories to distract him. Every time Wilhelmina cried out, Samuel would start to rise, and Silas would gently push him back down. "She is strong," Silas said. "She faced down rustlers. She will face down this too." Labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Just after sunrise, when Samuel had nearly worn a groove in the porch from pacing, he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn. He was through the door before Catherine could come get him, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. Wilhelmina lay in their bed, exhausted and sweaty but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. Samuel approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's delicate features, with tiny fists waving in the air. "We have a daughter," Wilhelmina said softly. "Samuel, meet Sarah Grace Logan." Samuel reached out with one finger and touched his daughter's tiny hand. Sarah immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength, and something in his chest cracked open. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and gathered his wife and daughter into his arms. "Thank you," he whispered against Wilhelmina's hair. "Thank you for her, for this life, for everything." "We made her together," Wilhelmina replied. "We made all of this together." The weeks after Sarah's birth were an exhausting and joyful blur. Wilhelmina recovered quickly, and though she was tired from feeding Sarah every few hours, she refused to stay in bed longer than necessary. Samuel was a devoted father, holding his daughter for hours, singing her songs his mother had sung to him, carrying her with him on the porch so Wilhelmina could rest. Summer came in full bloom, and the ranch thrived. The cattle multiplied, the grass grew thick and green, and Samuel hired 2 more hands to help manage the expanding operation. Wilhelmina painted when Sarah napped, capturing the light and color of Wyoming territory in watercolors that grew more confident with each passing week. Catherine opened her school in a converted outbuilding, and children from surrounding ranches began attending. On a warm August evening, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Samuel and Wilhelmina sat on the porch with Sarah sleeping between them in a cradle Samuel had built. They watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, the land they loved spread out before them. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Giving up your old life, marrying a rancher, living out here?" Wilhelmina turned to look at him, her dark eyes serious. "Samuel Logan, you dove into a raging river and refused to let it win. You saved my life, and in doing so you gave me a new one, a better one. I regret nothing." "The river brought us together," Samuel mused. "Maybe you had to slip beneath the current so I could find you. Or maybe we were always meant to find each other, and the river was just the way it happened." Wilhelmina laced her fingers through his. "Either way, I am grateful. For that day, for you, for all of this." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The ranch settled into evening rhythms around them, horses nickering in the corrals, the murmur of hands finishing their day, the eternal wind whispering through the grass. Thomas visited in September, delighting in his granddaughter and bringing gifts from Cheyenne. He stayed a week, and Samuel took him on a tour of the ranch, showing him the improvements they had made and the plans for further expansion. Thomas nodded approvingly at everything he saw. "You have done well," he told Samuel as they rode back toward the house. "Better than I dared hope when I gave you my blessing to court Wilhelmina." "I wake up every morning grateful she said yes," Samuel admitted. "Some days I still cannot believe my luck. It was not luck, it was meant to be." Thomas reined in his horse and turned to face Samuel fully. "Her mother and I were married 30 years, and I loved her every single one of those days. But I see the way you and Mina look at each other, and I recognize it. That is the kind of love that lasts, that weathers every storm. You two will build something that endures." Samuel thought about those words often in the months that followed. As winter came again, and they settled into the familiar patterns of cold weather ranching, he marveled at how completely his life had changed in less than 2 years. He had gone from a solitary rancher, focused only on building his herd, to a husband and father with roots that went deeper than he had ever imagined possible. Wilhelmina flourished in her role as wife, mother, and artist. She painted prolifically through the long winter, creating a series of watercolors depicting daily life on the ranch that she planned to try selling in Cheyenne the following spring. Sarah grew rapidly, learning to crawl and then to toddle, filling the house with laughter and the occasional tears. Catherine became pregnant herself, and the 2 women supported each other through the challenges and joys of frontier motherhood. The second spring brought another round of calving, branding, and all the hectic work of a ranch coming back to life after winter. Samuel and Silas began discussing plans to buy adjacent land and expand their operation significantly. The market for beef continued to grow, and they were positioned to take advantage of it. In late May, Wilhelmina took her paintings to Cheyenne while Samuel watched Sarah. She was gone for a week, and when she returned, she was flushed with triumph. A gallery owner had been impressed by her work and wanted to represent her, displaying and selling her paintings. The income would be modest, but the validation meant everything to Wilhelmina. "He called them authentic," she told Samuel excitedly as they lay in bed that night. "He said they captured the real West, not the romanticized version people back east imagine. He thinks they will sell well to people who want to understand what life is really like out here." "I am so proud of you," Samuel said, pulling her close. "You never gave up on your dreams, even when the world told you women should not be artists." "You never asked me to give them up," Wilhelmina replied. "You made space for them in our life. That means everything to me, Samuel." Summer passed in a golden blur of hard work and happiness. Thomas visited again in July, this time bringing a photographer who took pictures of the whole family. Samuel and Wilhelmina stood on their porch with Sarah between them, Sarah in her best dress, Wilhelmina wearing the sapphire ring that still fit perfectly, Samuel with his hand on his daughter's shoulder. The photographer captured them at a moment of perfect contentment, and that photograph would hang in the ranch house for generations. In August, Catherine gave birth to a son, Samuel Logan. Sarah, now walking and chattering constantly, was fascinated by the baby. The two families grew even closer, their lives intertwined by blood and shared purpose. Evening meals often included both families gathered around one table or the other, talking and laughing while the children played. As fall arrived again, bringing cool nights and the anticipation of winter, Wilhelmina discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a surprise but no less joyful. Samuel was thrilled at the prospect of another child, and Sarah seemed excited when they explained she would have a brother or sister. The second baby came the following April, another daughter they named Margaret Ann Logan after Samuel's mother. This birth was easier than Sarah's, and within days Wilhelmina was up and moving around, taking care of both girls with practiced efficiency. Samuel marveled at his growing family, at the way his house filled with the sounds of children and laughter. Time passed the way it does on a working ranch, measured in seasons and cycles rather than calendar dates. Spring brandings gave way to summer growth, fall roundups led to winter rest, and through it all the Logan family and ranch continued to thrive. Samuel and Silas bought the adjacent land and expanded their herd to over 1,000 head. They built a larger barn and additional outbuildings, hired more hands, and established themselves as one of the most successful ranching operations in the territory. Wilhelmina's paintings gained increasing recognition. A gallery in Denver began carrying her work, and she received a commission to create a series depicting different aspects of frontier life. She managed to balance her art with raising 2 daughters and running a ranch household, often painting while the girls napped or played quietly at her feet. Her work captured the essence of Wyoming territory, the vast skies and endless grass, the hard work and simple joys of frontier living. Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who followed her father around the ranch, learning about cattle and horses with the same intensity she applied to everything. Margaret was quieter, more content to sit with her mother and watch the world, but she showed early signs of artistic talent, always drawing or painting alongside Wilhelmina. By their 5th wedding anniversary in June 1879, Samuel and Wilhelmina had built a life that exceeded both of their early dreams. They stood on their porch one evening, watching their daughters play in the yard, the ranch spread out before them in the golden evening light. "Do you remember the first time we stood on this porch together?" Samuel asked, his arm around Wilhelmina's waist. "You were deciding whether you could build a life here." "I remember being terrified and excited in equal measure," Wilhelmina said. "I knew my life was about to change completely, but I did not know if I was strong enough for it." "You were always strong enough. You just had not realized it yet. Samuel pulled her closer. That day in the river when I pulled you out of the water, I thought I was saving you. But really, you saved me. You took a man who was married to his work and taught him what it meant to have a real home, a real family. We saved each other, Wilhelmina corrected. And we built this together, all of it. Thomas visited that summer with a surprise. He had been corresponding with relatives back in Pennsylvania, and Wilhelmina's younger cousin, Rebecca, wanted to come west and experience frontier life. She would arrive in August and stay through the winter if the arrangement worked out. Rebecca Grace turned out to be a lively young woman of 20, with red hair and freckles and an irrepressible enthusiasm for everything. She threw herself into ranch life with abandon, learning to ride and shoot, helping with the children, and generally bringing a new energy to the household. She was also a talented seamstress, and began teaching both Wilhelmina and Catherine more advanced techniques. The Logan Ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1880, Samuel and Silas employed 15 full-time hands and ran nearly 1,500 head of cattle. They built a second house on the property for overflow guests and visiting family. The area around the ranch became more populated as other homesteaders and ranchers arrived, and a small town began forming about 12 miles away, bringing a general store, a church, and eventually a one-room schoolhouse closer to home. Sarah started school at Catherine's school when she turned 6, riding there each morning with her father and returning each evening full of stories about what she had learned. Margaret would start the following year. Wilhelmina found herself with slightly more time for her painting and threw herself into a new series depicting the changing seasons on the ranch. In the spring of 1881, Wyoming Territory was admitted to the Union as the 44th state. The news was cause for celebration throughout the region. Samuel and Wilhelmina attended the statehood celebrations in Cheyenne, bringing the girls and meeting up with Thomas, who had become a prominent figure in the new state government. It felt symbolic somehow, this official recognition that the wild frontier they had settled was becoming something permanent and established. Life continued its steady rhythm through the 1880s. The ranch prospered, the family grew, and Samuel and Wilhelmina deepened into the kind of partnership that comes from weathering challenges together and building something lasting. They celebrated 10 years of marriage in 1884 with a large party that brought together friends and neighbors from across the region. Thomas gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 10 years ago, my daughter nearly drowned in the North Platte River, he said, raising his glass. A cowboy named Samuel Logan dove in and refused to let the river win. He saved her life that day, but more than that, he gave her a new life. He gave her love and partnership and a home in this wild country, and she gave him the same. Together they have built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch but a real home, a place of love and laughter and hard work. To Samuel and Wilhelmina, and to many more years together. As the years passed, Samuel and Wilhelmina watched their daughters grow. Sarah became an accomplished horsewoman and expressed interest in attending college back east to study veterinary science. A bold ambition for a young woman, but one her parents supported wholeheartedly. Margaret showed increasing artistic talent and began working alongside her mother, learning advanced painting techniques and developing her own style. In 1889, Rebecca married one of the ranch hands, a steady young man named Peter Hartley, and they established their own small ranch nearby with help from Samuel and Silas. The extended family network grew stronger, bound by blood and shared experience. Through it all, Samuel and Wilhelmina remained devoted to each other. They still took long rides together when they could steal the time, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of their early courtship had matured into something deeper and more durable, a love built on trust and respect, and countless small moments of choosing each other day after day. On a warm evening in June 1894, their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Wilhelmina walked down to the creek where he had proposed so many years before. The willow trees had grown taller, and the creek ran clear and gentle in its summer flow, nothing like the raging torrent that had nearly killed her. They sat on the same fallen log, now weathered and gray with age, and Samuel took her hand. 20 years, he marveled. It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. We were so young, Wilhelmina said, studying their intertwined hands. Hers bore the calluses and scars of ranch work now, and her wedding ring had worn thin in places from 2 decades of wear. We thought we understood what we were promising each other, but we had no idea. You think we would have done it differently if we had known, if we could have seen all the challenges ahead? Wilhelmina thought about all the years, the difficult calvings and harsh winters, the times money was tight and the future uncertain, the illnesses and injuries that had frightened her, the sheer exhausting work of building and maintaining a life on the frontier. She thought about sleepless nights with sick children, about the time Samuel nearly died from a kick to the chest from a spooked horse, about all the 1,000 small fears and large ones that came with frontier life. Not a single thing, she said firmly. Every challenge made us stronger. Every difficulty we overcame together bound us closer. I would live every moment again exactly as it happened because it led to this, to us, to the life we have built. Samuel leaned over and kissed her, slow and sweet, the kiss of 20 years of marriage and a love that had only deepened with time. When they pulled apart, he smiled at her in the way that still made her heart flutter. I dove into a river to save you, he said. But really, you saved me. You gave me a reason to build something more than just a ranch. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, started the day I pulled you from that water and looked into your eyes. We were meant to find each other, Wilhelmina replied. The river just brought us together, and you refused to let it win. They sat by the creek as the sun set, watching the light fade and the stars emerge, 2 people who had built a life together from nothing but determination and love. Behind them, up the slight rise, lights glowed in the ranch house windows. Their daughters would be setting the table for dinner, the hands would be finishing their day's work, the cattle would be settling for the night. It was all so ordinary and so extraordinary at the same time. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Wilhelmina thought about the frightened young woman who had slipped beneath the rushing current 20 years ago. That woman was gone, transformed by the wild country and hard work and the love of a good man into someone stronger, someone who belonged to this land as much as it belonged to her. She had found her place, her purpose, her great love, all because a cowboy refused to let the river win. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Sarah graduated from college in 1896 and returned to Wyoming to establish the region's first veterinary practice, revolutionary work that earned her both admiration and skepticism. Margaret married a young artist she met when Wilhelmina's work was featured in a Denver exhibition, and they settled in Cheyenne, where Margaret opened her own gallery featuring Western artists. Samuel and Wilhelmina became grandparents in 1897 when Sarah had a daughter, and then again in 1898 when Margaret had twin boys. They delighted in the role, spoiling their grandchildren and passing on stories of the early days of the ranch. Thomas, now in his 70s, still visited regularly, bringing candy for the great-grandchildren and surveyors' tools to teach them about measuring the land. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel and Silas's management, even as the West became less wild and more settled. Barbed wire crisscrossed the range now, and railroads connected even remote areas. The frontier era was ending, but the ranch remained strong, a testament to the vision and hard work of the people who built it. In the spring of 1899, on a morning much like the one 25 years earlier, Samuel and Wilhelmina rode out to check on the spring calving. The North Platte River ran high with snowmelt, its rushing current a reminder of the day that had changed both their lives. They reined in their horses at the spot where Wilhelmina had crossed all those years ago, now marked by a sturdy bridge. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had crossed safely that day?" Wilhelmina asked. "If I had never fallen in, if you had never saved me?" "Every time I look at you," Samuel admitted, "I think about how close I came to never knowing you, never building this life. It terrifies me even now. But it did not happen that way. I fell, you saved me, we built this life together." Wilhelmina reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "And I would not change a single moment." They rode on toward the ranch, two people whose love had endured for a quarter-century and would endure for the rest of their lives. Behind them, the river rushed and churned, eternal and unchanging, the same river that had nearly claimed Wilhelmina but instead had brought her to her destiny. The Logan Ranch stood strong through the turn of the century, a monument to determination and love. Samuel and Wilhelmina grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminishing. They sat on their porch every evening, weather permitted, holding hands and watching the sunset, two people who had refused to let life's challenges win. Their story became a legend in the region, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy. The cowboy who dove into the raging North Platte to save a stranger, refusing to let the river win. The couple who built an empire from nothing. The love that endured through 2 decades of challenges and triumph. But to Samuel and Wilhelmina, it was simply their life. The one they had built together, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of choosing each other at a time. It was not perfect, but it was theirs, earned through sweat and tears and stubborn determination. On a warm June evening in 1904, their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard, 3 generations of Logans and Graces and Hartleys, all connected by the love of 2 people who had refused to give up on each other or their dreams. Samuel stood to make a toast, his hand trembling slightly with age but his voice still strong. 30 years ago today, I married the woman I loved. The woman I had pulled from a river just a month before, the woman who had captured my heart the moment I looked into her eyes. I thought I knew what I was promising when I said those vows. I thought I understood what forever meant. But I had no idea how deep love could go, how strong a partnership could be, how much joy could be found in building a life together. He turned to Wilhelmina, who sat beside him with tears streaming down her weathered face. "You made me a better man. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You stood beside me through every challenge, celebrated every triumph, and never once let me give up on our dreams. You are the best decision I ever made, and I would make that same choice every single day." Wilhelmina stood and took his hand, facing their assembled family. Samuel Logan dove into a raging river and refused to let it win. He saved my life that day, but he did more than that. He gave me a new life, one filled with love and purpose and belonging. Together we built this ranch, raised our children, created a legacy that will endure long after we are gone. And we did it all because we chose each other, every single day, no matter what challenges came. The celebration continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and stories. As midnight approached and guests began drifting toward home or spare beds, Samuel and Wilhelmina slipped away to their porch. They sat in their familiar spots, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. 30 years, Wilhelmina mused. Sometimes it feels impossible that we have lived an entire lifetime together. And we will live many more years yet, Samuel replied. I am not done with you, Mina Logan. I refuse to let time win any more than I let that river win. She laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. Then I suppose we will just have to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until time finally claims us both. That sounds perfect to me. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who no longer needed words to communicate, who could speak volumes with a touch or a glance. Around them, the ranch settled into sleep. Cattle lowed softly in the pastures, horses shifted in their stalls, the night wind whispered through the grass. It was all so familiar, so beloved, so completely theirs. The years that followed were gentler than those that had come before. Samuel and Silas handed over day-to-day management of the ranch to the younger generation, though both brothers remained active and involved. Wilhelmina continued to paint, her work now sought after by collectors across the country. She had become something of a celebrity, a woman who had succeeded as an artist while also thriving in the demanding role of ranch wife and mother. They traveled some, visiting Margaret in Cheyenne and Sarah at her practice, spending time with grandchildren who were growing up in a West that was far different from the one they had settled. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land they had claimed and shaped and loved for so many years. Thomas passed away in 1906, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Wilhelmina grieved deeply for her father, but found comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy and settled, had known his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, had watched her fulfill all the dreams she had harbored when they first came west so many years ago. As Samuel and Wilhelmina entered their 70s, they slowed down physically, but remained sharp in mind and spirit. They still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat on the porch holding hands, still looked at each other with the same love that had burned bright for over 40 years. In the summer of 1914, on their 40th wedding anniversary, the family once again gathered at the ranch. The celebration was more subdued than previous milestone anniversaries, recognition that Samuel and Wilhelmina were both aging and facing the inevitable end that comes to all lives. But there was joy too, joy in what they had built and the legacy they were leaving. Samuel's toast that evening was brief but heartfelt. 40 years with the woman I love, 40 years of building and growing and learning, 40 years of choosing each other every single day. I could not ask for a better life or a better partner to live it with. Thank you, Mina, for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Wilhelmina held his hand tightly, aware of how frail he had become, how his once strong frame had thinned and weakened with age. But when he looked at her, she still saw the young cowboy who had dove into a river without hesitation, who had refused to let her drown, who had given her everything. You saved me, she said simply. And I loved you for it. I love you still. I will love you always. That night, they lay in bed together as they had for 40 years, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Samuel's breathing was labored, his heart not as strong as it once was, but he held Wilhelmina close and felt content. Whatever time they had left, they would spend it together. Samuel Logan passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January morning in 1916, at the age of 76. He died as he had lived, with Wilhelmina beside him, her hand in his. His last words, whispered in the hour before dawn, were, "I would do it all again. Every moment." The funeral drew people from across the state, ranchers and townspeople, old hands who had worked for Samuel decades ago, business associates and friends. They came to pay respects to a man who had helped build Wyoming, who had carved a ranch from raw prairie, and raised a family and lived with integrity every day of his life. Wilhelmina stood at the gravesite, flanked by her daughters and grandchildren, and watched as they lowered her husband into the earth of the land he had loved. She did not cry. She had cried all her tears in the days since his death. Now she simply stood straight and remembered. She remembered a young man diving into a river, refusing to let it win. She remembered his proposal by the creek, his awkward nervousness in the officers' mess, his joy when their daughters were born. She remembered 42 years of shared sunrises and quiet conversations, of building something lasting together, of choosing each other day after day after day. After the service, family and friends returned to the ranch house for food and remembrance. Story after story was told about Samuel, painting a picture of a man who was fair and hardworking, devoted to his family, stubborn in the best way. Wilhelmina listened to them all, grateful that so many people had known and loved her husband. As evening approached and guests began to leave, Wilhelmina slipped away to the porch. She sat in her usual spot, the chair beside her empty now, and looked out at the ranch. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white, pristine and peaceful. The mountains in the distance stood eternal, witnesses to everything that had happened here. Sarah found her there an hour later, sitting quietly in the cold. "Mama, you should come inside. It is too cold out here." "In a minute." Wilhelmina did not take her eyes from the horizon. "I am just talking to your father, telling him about the service, about all the people who came. He would have been pleased." Sarah sat in Samuel's chair, taking her mother's hand. "He loved you so much. Everyone could see it. I loved him just as much." Wilhelmina finally turned to look at her daughter. "Do you know what he told me once? That when he pulled me from the river, he thought he was saving me. But really, we saved each other, and we did. We saved each other every day for 42 years. He gave you a good life, Mama." "We gave each other a good life," Wilhelmina corrected gently. "That is the difference. We built it together, every part of it, and now I have to figure out how to live the rest of mine without him." She did figure it out, though it was not easy. Wilhelmina lived another 6 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and her art. She painted some of her best work during those years, a series of pieces about love and loss and the endurance of the human spirit. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch, but she was lonely in a way she had never been before. The house felt too empty without Samuel's presence, the evenings too quiet without his voice. She took to walking down to the creek where he had proposed, sitting on the bank and talking to him as if he could hear. Maybe he could. She liked to think so. Wilhelmina Grace Logan passed away peacefully on a June morning in 1922, at the age of 70. Her daughters found her in bed, a painting propped beside her, the last one she had been working on. It depicted the North Platte River in full spring flood, dangerous and beautiful and alive. In the foreground was a figure diving into the water, reaching for someone beneath the surface. She was buried beside Samuel in the ranch cemetery, their headstones side by side overlooking the land they had built together. The inscription on her stone reads simply, "She slipped beneath the rushing current, and the cowboy dove in and refused to let the river win. Together they built a love that endured. The Logan Ranch continued through the generations, passed down from Samuel and Wilhelmina to their daughters and then to their grandchildren. Each new generation added their own touches, but maintained the core of what the founders had built. The house still stood, now renovated and modernized but recognizable. The creek still ran clear, the willow trees growing tall along its banks. The land still stretched wide under the endless Wyoming sky. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset together. The cowboy who refused to let the river win, and the woman he saved, still choosing each other, still building their love, still together after all the years and all the miles. Their story became more than a local legend. It became a symbol of frontier love, of determination and partnership, of refusing to give up on each other or their dreams. Books were written about them, historians studied their letters and journals, artists painted scenes from their life. But all of that was secondary to the simple truth at the heart of their story. Two people met by chance, bound by circumstance, and chose to build a life together. They faced challenges and hardships, celebrated triumphs and joys, and through it all, they never stopped choosing each other. That was their legacy, more enduring than the ranch they built or the children they raised. They proved that love, real love, the kind that lasts, is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up every day, doing the work, refusing to give up even when the current tries to drag you under. Samuel Logan dove into a raging river and refused to let it win. Wilhelmina Grace slipped beneath the rushing current and was saved. Together they built a love story for the ages, one that would inspire generations to come. And somewhere, in the space between sunset and starlight, between memory and legend, they are still sitting on that porch, still holding hands, still together. Their story reminds us that the best love stories are not about perfect people finding each other. They are about imperfect people refusing to give up on each other. They are about diving into the current even when it is dangerous, about holding on even when it would be easier to let go, about building something lasting in a world that is constantly changing. Samuel and Wilhelmina Logan's love was not perfect, but it was real. It was tested by hardship and proven by time. It endured through loss and celebrated through joy. And in the end, it became the foundation upon which not just a ranch, but an entire legacy was built. Generations of Logans would tell their children about the cowboy and the river, about the woman who nearly drowned and the man who saved her, about the love that grew from that terrifying moment into something that lasted a lifetime and beyond. That is the power of choosing each other. That is the magic of refusing to let the river win. That is the essence of a love story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations as a reminder of what is possible when two people commit to building something together. And so the story ends where it began, with the river and the cowboy and the woman who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The water still rushes past Fort Laramie, swollen each spring with mountain snowmelt, dangerous and beautiful and alive. The land still stretches wide under the endless Wyoming sky, bearing witness to all the love and loss and triumph that has unfolded upon it. And somewhere in that vast expanse, the legacy of Samuel and Wilhelmina Logan endures, a testament to the power of love and determination and refusing to give up, no matter how strong the current.